Let's talk about what's going on in Ukraine. U.S. forces have been put on high alert overnight as Vladimir Putin has a message for them in the West. Get ready for all hell to break loose. That's basically the message. He didn't say it in that kind of way, but basically, get ready for all hell to break loose in Ukraine. We're going to show you the very latest out of Russia in a moment. But first, a massacre of innocent people took place this morning in Donetsk, in the People's Republic. The images are just beyond words. People going about their day, shopping, waiting for a bus. But of course, this has been happening in the Donbass for 8 years. We know about this, right? This week actually marks the 8th anniversary of the start of the genocide in Donbass. For the last 8 years, there has been a genocide there. For many of you watching our show right now, just a show of hands, like how many of you are aware that this has been happening? For a lot of you that watch our show for any length of time, you absolutely know that to be the case. You already know the truth. The evidence is overwhelming. It's irrefutable. And in 2014, the United States and Britain created a coup in Ukraine. This is how this all unfolded. And they installed a puppet NATO government in Ukraine. The ethnic Russians living in Donbass didn't like this government. They said, we don't like this. We don't like a government created by the United States and NATO. We don't want to have anything to do with it. It became known as the Russian Spring. We hear a lot about the Arab Spring. We never hear about the Russian Spring. This is true. And Russians living in Donbass said, no, thank you. We don't want your NATO puppet government. That puppet government is now led by an autocrat. His name is Vladimir Zelensky. You might have recognized him from his hit TV movie co-starring Ben Stiller. He's the guy in the green shirt there to your right. That's Ben Stiller on the left. It's a character he plays. He plays the role of president of Ukraine. He's playing it pretty well, with all the photo shoots and all of the meet and greets and Zoom meetings that he does. Zelensky shut down television stations, you may recall, opposition media. He jailed political opponents. He's made journalists disappear. He's gotten filthy rich, of course, thanks to the billions of dollars that NATO money has poured into his country in the United States over the years. We've detailed, of course, the corruption within the government and how much they've made. It's listed as one of the most corrupt governments in Europe. All of this has been approved. All of this is known by the United States and NATO allies. It's part of the plan. In fact, it was all written down by the RAND Corporation, which we featured here on the show in those leaked documents last week on the show, that it was to use Ukraine as a proxy to provoke Russia into war. Right? That was the plan all along, with sanctions and NATO weapons, that they would weaken and destroy Russia. This was the plan. But human life was never part of the plan. It never is. It's always about money. It's always about power. Who cares about innocent people? Especially when big money is at play. These guys don't care about innocent people at all. And since 2014, tens of thousands of innocent lives wiped out in the Donbass, thanks to constant shelling, raining hell down on people, going about their business, their daily lives. Yes, bombings at malls, at grocery stores, at all manner of residential areas. For anyone living in these areas, they've watched constant bombings for 8 long years. They've lost everything. They've lost everything. In fact, this afternoon...
I just want to mention some statements where they had made, and I don't know how much I can say, but where they were basically saying to eliminate the children because they could become grown-up Russians. Like, that was the sentiment.
I don't doubt it. Absolutely. And of course, we've also seen the indoctrination camps and so forth.
Well, this region fought tooth and nail against joining Ukraine when the new government was installed for years and years, right? And so the government fought them back really hard, right? These are citizens who never really got, and they did have votes. These votes were, they were accused of not being legitimate or fair or what have you, but overwhelmingly people in this region do support a reintegration with Russia, just like many in Crimea were like, good, I've been waiting for this, right? Many in Crimea, when it became Ukraine, they said, what is this you did to my passport? I don't want to be Ukrainian, I'm Russian, right? And so, I mean, obviously there's a long and storied history there. We're being simplistic for the sake of time.
Well, and someone in our chat just said, why didn't the people of Donbass just move to Russia? And I know, and I'm not demeaning your comment in any way. It's a great question. But when people's ancestral home is in a place that they've spent with many generations, why would they just up and move, to another country or to hundreds of miles away? Like, that's not necessarily easy for everyone, and not everyone has money.
Well, these are mostly like farmers, and
yes,
there's not people who can just pick up their farm and that they've had their entire generations and just move it.
Right, just pick up and move, and not everyone has that kind of money. I get what you're saying, and maybe many of us in that situation might do the same. We would just pack up and get the hell out of there, right? Hurricane Katrina, you don't live in New Orleans anymore. You relocate to Houston, and that's now your life, right? That's it, right? But it's not so easy for everyone to do that. And the fact this afternoon, though, something stunning happened in Donbass, the second Donbass Republic. A place called Donetsk wants a referendum to join Russia. This happened this afternoon. The second Donbass Republic, following Luhansk, voting on uniting with Russia. This afternoon, the Civic Chamber of Donetsk People's Republic called on their local leaders to hold a vote as soon as possible. Quote, all of us feel and know for a long time that Donbass is Russia. We've been fighting for this for 8 long years. For this, we daily suffer strikes on our homes, streets, hospitals, schools, and kindergartens. If you want to see the images, I encourage you to go and look at them. They're awful to look at. But follow Eva Bartlett on Twitter. She just went back to Donetsk, and she was there today covering these awful, awful pictures. They will change your life when you look at them, but we should all see them because they're that important. We can't show them here. We'll be blocked. So they're sick of it. The people there are sick of it. They're sick of being attacked every day.
I mean, what are the chances the West allows a fair election, a fair vote on this?
Well, I don't think they'll have a choice, right? If it's just if it's a people's referendum, and they then say we are voting, and we in the Donetsk are now going to be a part of Russia.
I mean, we see how modern day elections though can be manipulated. Look at the Brexit movement, right? So obviously this is something that can be resisted by the powers that be. I
mean, it will be, of course, how the Western media will spin it.
Of course.
Right? They'll spin it as this is a sham election, this is a sham referendum vote.
They want to be a part of Russia because they don't know any better. They're ignorant people. They don't understand that it's Russia that's hurting them.
Like, you should love every day to be shelled by people. Like, you should enjoy that, embrace that. Right.
We have a pretty... we have a pretty long-running tradition in the U.S., though, that any election that doesn't come, the outcome is not what we wanted. It was a fake election, and sometimes we'll actually go in, overthrow the government, and give them the chance to do it again until it looks like what we want. I mean, that is not out of the U.S.
We love doing that.
Operations.
No, we love doing that. That's our modus operandi, right? So these people they're sick of it. In the Donbass. They are sick of it being attacked every day. For many of you, though, who are watching this show, be honest. There's nothing to be ashamed of. For many of you, this is new news. Like, you have no idea what we're talking about. You've never even heard of the Donbass. You've never even heard that they've been attacked for 8 years. You have no idea. Don't be ashamed about it. Just be honest. You never heard about it. A genocide? Really? I've only heard that Russia attacked Ukraine in what CNN and mainstream media tells us is an unprovoked attack. That's all I hear, right? Here's mainstream media. Listen.
We are seeing a stunning turn of events in Ukraine 6 months after Russia's unprovoked invasion.
Unprovoked and unjustified attack on Ukraine.
They say Putin's unprovoked war in Ukraine has damaged Russia's future.
President Putin has launched a horrific, unprovoked attack on their country.
Oh. It's almost like they're reading off of cue cards, isn't it? Like, it's all part of a plan. They got the same
the crazy thing is,
freaking talking points.
The crazy thing is Putin warned for 8 years. He warned. He said that he was going to do what he did. Like, he gave us plenty of warning, told us what we should not do in order to prevent it, and we just kept doing it. It's like the Bart Simpson where she's saying, "Don't touch me." He's like, "I'll quit it. I'll quit it." They
keep doing it,
poking the bear, and wouldn't stop.
Yeah.
And there are many reports that Ukraine fired or ordered drone strikes on Crimea as recently as March 2021. That is a provocation. So, these are things that the Western media covered until they didn't. And then they pretend that it didn't happen.
Oh, yeah. And you can read all of the newspaper articles about how corrupt Ukraine was. I mean, it was just awful. It covered. I mean, the United States State Department calling out the corruption and the human rights abuses in Ukraine. Suddenly, all of that stuff disappeared. Where'd that go? That's convenient. That's convenient, isn't it? But a genocide,
and
most
by
people
the way, We do not cash our Kremlin checks, just so you guys know. Like they send them, but we do not cash them, because there's going to be people in the comments that are saying we're working for the Kremlin, we're Russian apologists, we're Putin apologists, but that is not what we are at all.
No, that just shuts down any kind of meaningful discussion about what's actually going on.
Right.
Here.
To say that this is pro-Russian is a trump card to just throw it away. Say, I don't want to hear this. I want to just sort of funnel money towards Ukraine and feel better about myself and think that I am sort of preventing the Russian spread of dominance in the world, right? Without thinking of any context.
Right.
So we are not pro anybody. We are absolutely anti-war. And we're talking about the narrative that gets people to continue to support a dragged out bloody war where people get killed like they did today.
So you might be forgiven if you watched all this mainstream media coverage where it's just an unprovoked attack. You don't know anything better because you're watching CNN, and that's not your fault. You just didn't know. I don't want to blame anybody, right? This propaganda machine is strong, but you've probably been sitting there thinking a genocide in eastern Ukraine and Donbass? What are these guys even talking about? Well, you've never heard of it because you've been force-fed a steady diet of bullshit and propaganda from mainstream media working in lockstep with NATO and working with the intelligence deep state for many, many years. Caitlin Johnstone, who's a great thinker, of course, anti-war. We are big anti-war fans around here on this show, if you haven't been able to tell. And she is a great thinker in that space. Caitlin Johnstone says it says it best. She says, if we were being told the truth about this war, they wouldn't be banning Russian media. We wouldn't be hearing propagandistic messaging like unprovoked invasion at every mention of Ukraine. And those expressing scrutiny of all of this wouldn't be swarmed by AstroTurf Empire trolls. That's great, right? So you want to question this? You're going to suddenly be trolled right on Twitter, by somebody with a Ukrainian flag emoji in their Twitter handle, right?
What does AstroTurf have to do with it in that context, do you think?
I don't know exactly how she would.
Someone with like a manicured lawn or something? Sorry.
No, it's a slang term that gets used. Like astroturfing is I may get it wrong because it's like one of those things. Like I'm slightly familiar with what it is, but it's like I know that like they've recently accused like Elon Musk of astroturfing people by having people go out and just be like almost like bots, like armies of people just spreading a certain message, like to acting as though they're normal people. They're not being paid to do it, kind of thing. I mean, it's something along those lines. Like I said, I may be getting it a bit wrong, but it's
all right.
That's the gist.
Yeah.
Because you're the cool Reddit dude here, so you would know the context. Thank you.
So just for some context here, in 2014, NATO-backed puppet government, they agreed to leave these areas alone. This was the plan. They signed what were at the time known as the Minsk Agreements with Russia. They would leave eastern Ukraine alone to live their lives. NATO wouldn't expand, and all would be good. This was the plan. Let me read to you just the first few lines of the Minsk Agreements here on your screen. Package of measures for the implementation of the Minsk Agreements. Number 1, immediate and comprehensive ceasefire in certain areas of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions of Ukraine, and its strict implementation starting on the 15th of February 2015. Number 2, withdrawal of heavy weapons by both sides on equal distances in order to create a security zone of at least 50 kilometers wide. So that means getting rid of artillery systems with calibers greater than 100 millimeters and more. All sorts of huge, anti-artillery weapons to be removed, right? And for the Ukrainian troops to move back from this line of contact, right? So they knew what was happening here. And it was simple. Follow this, right? It sounds great. The people of Donbass then could live in peace. No more shelling. That never happened. Well, almost from the very beginning of this NATO new puppet government launching a proxy war and violating the Minsk Agreements, they started to shell this whole area. Like they just immediately violated these Minsk Agreements. Here's just a snapshot. If you want to see the amount of attacks, just keep this up on the screen here over the last 2 years. Now, this, just bear in mind, this is not 8 years. This is just the past 2. Now, notice the dip in the middle, always around winter time. It kind of just, the shelling kind of slows down a little bit, right?
But notice that during the pandemic, like, when we all went into lockdown, is this third bar from the left went up. This is March of 2020. So they didn't have to lock down for the pandemic.
No,
they ramped up.
They just kept shelling. So let me break this. What you're seeing on your screen here in orange is shelling, okay? Notice, by the way, at the end of the screen, all the way to the right, is February when the war started, the invasion started. Look at the increase in shelling. Look at the orange shelling just over the past. Again, these are just the past 2 years. Shelling, small arms and lightweight weapons, drones and airstrikes, sniper fire, all of this hitting Donetsk or the Donbass. It only goes up there to January of this year. It's unbelievable.
Unprovoked, huh?
Unprovoked, right? So when you hear unprovoked, I want you to laugh at them. The people of Donbass had been asking for help from Russia for years, actually. They've been saying, can Moscow help us? Putin tried to get Ukraine to stop the shelling, tried to get NATO to stop the shelling. At this stage, Putin had had enough, and he called it what it was, which was a genocide. And when 14,000 people are killed, that is a genocide. He met with German leader Olaf Scholz in January and told him straight to his face that ethnic Russians living in the Donbass they were being killed daily. And he told it in front of a large television audience so everyone could see it. Putin called it a genocide and said in January that they did not want a war, that he didn't want a war. He didn't want to have to go into this region and simply wanted the Ukrainians to put their weapons down and stop attacking the Donbass and enforce the Minsk agreements. And that they signed, by the way, and then they violated. Here is Putin in his own words about that. Watch.
Позволю себе только добавить, что по нашим оценкам, то, что происходит на Донбассе сегодня, это и есть геноцид. Но для нас это может быть уже поздно. Поэтому мы хотим решить этот вопрос сейчас. Вот прямо сейчас, в ближайшее время, в ходе переговорного процесса. Повторю, полученные нами от Соединенных Штатов и других и членов НАТО ответы на предложения по гарантиям безопасности, на наш взгляд, не отвечают упомянутым 3 базовым российским требованиям. Присутствует ряд соображений, которые мы не только не против обсуждать в предыдущие годы. По вопросам европейской безопасности, по вопросам определенных систем вооружения, имеется в виду ракеты средней и меньшей дальности, и военной транспарентности. Мы готовы к этой совместной работе и дальше. По поводу, хотим мы этого или нет. Конечно, нет. Именно поэтому мы и выдвинули предложение о переговорном процессе, результатом которого должна быть договоренность об обеспечении равной безопасности всех, включая нашу страну.
Including our country. Seems reasonable, right? Stop killing people. Stop moving NATO forces into this area. And oh, by the way, why don't you live to follow the Minsk agreements that you signed? You're violating that peace agreement, so stop that shit. That's the idea. That's what he was basically saying.
Well, look at World War II. I mean, Russia lost 25 million people fighting the Germans, and we came in at the last minute and we worked with them. We still get the credit to this day, but most of the liberation was done by Russia, and that's why when they call this a invasion, I don't like that. I call it a liberation because that's what they're doing, and I don't understand why we would be on the side of them during World War II, but another genocide that's going on now. Why are we picking a side in that?
Well, that's a bigger conversation about hegemony, I think.
And the U.S. dollar and the power, right? I mean, yes, and this speaks to what's going on in China and Taiwan. So it speaks to a declining U.S. dollar and a declining U.S. hegemony and a rising power in Eurasia. And you're absolutely seeing that with mineral resources and manufacturing and the value of the currency tied to gold and silver. And so it's about money. It's about power. It's about hegemony in the world.
Yes.
I mean, that's maybe a little simplistic, but I think,
Well, it is. I just basically like saying, because if you look at the hypocrisy of the United States, we say we want to go help Venezuelans get their basic human rights, but we don't care about the basic human rights of the people in the Donbass. It's like, why do we always choose sides? And that's the hypocrisy of the United States foreign policy.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, we're going to talk in a few minutes about Armenia and why we decided to sort of stick our, spoon in that pot. Yes, it is, it's a lot of pomp and circumstance to further an agenda of keeping world dominance, or what is left of it.
So you're violating this peace agreement, Putin says. But NATO, that didn't stop NATO. They directed Zelensky to escalate. the actions with increased attacks, moving troops towards Crimea. As a reminder, over 90% of the people in Crimea are ethnic Russian and want nothing to do with Ukraine. Ukraine blacked out the media so that no Western journalists could see any of this. The media blackout continues to this day. Here's CNN just a few days ago admitting that they can't get accurate information because, Ukraine won't allow it.
Say Ukrainian authorities, but remember that this is really hard for us to verify because of the media blackout. Journalists just not allowed to get close to the front lines of those counteroffensives.
Oh, that's interesting. Really? So we can get accurate information then from the Ukrainian side. So if you notice, a lot of the propaganda that we see comes from Ukrainian officials say. That'll be how you read your news articles when you see it in the Associated Press or Wall Street Journal or otherwise. Ukrainian officials say. Oh, so we get our news from Ukrainian officials who say this, right? But we don't get it from journalists because their media blacked out. They're not allowed to go there. They're blocked from that.
And as long as we're talking about superpowers, Crimea was originally settled by the Tatars, which was a Muslim-speaking and Turkish population. They still have representatives there who don't really identify with either side of this war. They absolutely don't really get a vote. Like, no one's asking them what they wanted from this land originally.
Like Native Americans.
Yes, yeah.
So 8 years later, Ukraine has regained land in the Donbass over the past few weeks. And over the weekend, they've increased attacks on residential neighborhoods. They attack journalists trying to cover the story from Donbass. Remember, Ukraine doesn't want you to see what's happening. Meanwhile, this weekend, American generals put U.S. troops in Europe on high alert because they don't know what Putin's next move will be. So this is General Mark Milley in Poland yesterday, said he wants all troops on high alert and ready for action. What's he so concerned about? Since the invasion, the U.S. has added roughly 10,000 troops in Europe, many based in NATO states that border Russia like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. And I wonder why Nancy Pelosi just flew to Armenia, which is another border state. Interesting. We've also added another 4,700 troops from the 101st Airborne Division from Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Those were already being deployed to Europe. Putin has a big message for Zelensky, though, and NATO forces. He was asked about the continued attacks in Europe. He was asked about the continued attacks in eastern Ukraine, and Putin had a forceful message. He said, "We're witnessing attempts to stage terror attacks, attempts to damage our civilian infrastructure. We respond to this with restraint, but only for the time being." Here he is in his own words. Well, in his own words, but translated.
It's not just some kind of mild warning. It is special military operation, after all. But we see these attempts to launch some terrorist attacks, to deal some damage to our civilian infrastructure. That's true. We are reacting in restrained manner until a certain point. Recently, Russian armed forces dealt a couple of significant blows. So let's consider it a warning. If the situation will continue to develop in this manner, then we will respond in more serious way.
So Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova warns that if the U.S. decides to supply weapons to Ukraine with longer-range missiles, it will cross Russia's red line and they would become a party to the conflict. She also said Russia reserves the right to respond adequately if the U.S. decides to do so. And the U.S. just announced a new weapons package to Ukraine, advanced rockets that will travel up to 50 miles. That's about 80 kilometers. And all of this to say that their military knew about all of this. So Mr. Sivkov, who is a spokesperson for the Academy of Artillery and Rocket Science, says that one of the he was a member of the general staff, said this, and I'm going to read a quote this afternoon from a news report. This is the Russian side saying this. And they're referring to the Ukrainian offensive. Our military knew that an offensive was being prepared. So now the troops are regrouping to destroy the grouping of the armed forces of Ukraine, which has come into the Isium region. It must be borne in the mind that there are no fortified areas there. So the task of destroying the most combat-ready Ukrainian units will be solved quite successfully. This will take a few more days. This is what we talked about, guys, a few weeks ago. This idea of leading them into this funnel, that appears to be what's going to happen. Now, Putin's not saying that, but he is saying we are sitting back and we are ready, and we're operating with restraint and only for the time being. And once these forces have left all those trenched areas where they were fortified for a long time, and now they get up and they leave those areas, now they're out in the open. And we could see hell unfolding in Ukraine over the next few days, few weeks here. It's going to be a brutal, brutal autumn in that region.
I just wonder how much of this is rhetoric and how much of this is really going to come to fruition on either sides, right? Because Russia continues to say, if the United States continues to get involved, continues to send weapons, continues
red line. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
We've been saying this for a long time, and it's terrifying all of us.
Right.
Meanwhile, President Biden is saying, "Oh, we're in this for as long as it takes." These are our red flags, and so I don't know. When in 2014, when Russia moved into Crimea, there was a Financial Times cartoon that had a NATO general saying, well, we're not just talking tough on Russia, we're threatening to act tough too. So at the time, the sentiment was that the West was sort of just saying threatening words, but did nothing, right? And now the West is doing a lot, and it's hurting ourselves, I guess, since I live in the Western world. And so, there's a lot of I feel a lot of anticipation, I think, like everyone else that's watching us right now, and unsure how to feel or what to know, how to live around this.
I mean, the truth will be the proof will be in the pudding, right? I mean, I guess if we see a major military attack by Russia against these targets in eastern Ukraine, well, that's all the proof we need, right? And then if the United States continues to cross that red line, what will Russia do? Will that continue to be bluster? Will they actually, attack American ships in the Black Sea? I mean, who knows at this point? I mean, here, don't forget, they're actively attacking United States military equipment on a daily basis.
Yes.
They are destroying, and they're actively engaged in fights with U.S. Special Forces, with NATO forces. So this idea that it's just Ukrainians against Russians is laughable, and by the way, demonstrably provable that it's false. So I guess we'll see. But prepare yourselves, guys. We're going to be following this story all week as this, and again, U.S. forces on high alert right now in Poland. So we'll see if there's more deployments to Ukraine from the United States side and the NATO forces.